Hello, this is Eric John from Spherix Global Insights, head of Gastroenterology Insights, and I'm here today with Dr. Stephen Hanauer, gastroenterologist from the Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine. Dr. Hanauer, thank you so much for joining us today, especially at this busy time during ACG. So we really appreciate it. How are you?
I'm well, and I thank you. I apologize for speaking from a hotel room rather than an office with better lighting, et cetera.
No, that's absolutely fine. We appreciate you taking some time out of your schedule just to be with us today. And it's an important time, I think, in terms of the management of IBD. And one of the things I wanted to ask you was the last time we spoke was back in February, and at that time we had just gotten word that there was the oral surveillance study in terms of Xeljanz and the JAK inhibitors. And now we have several months later. And so that happened during the course of 2021. We also had the launch of a new oral therapy to treat ulcerative colitis in 2021. And we also had the increase of formulary status for infliximab biosimilars. So thinking about those things or any other events that happened in 2021, what do you see as the thing that happened that had the biggest impact in terms of gastroenterologists as they treat their IBD patients?
Well, I actually think that the biggest impact is expanding knowledge regarding the COVID pandemic and the potential impact on our patients. We spent a great deal of the past year trying to make certain that our patients were vaccinated and then following up on them to make certain that the vaccinations were effective. What we had previously learned was that there was really not much impact of our current management of IBD on the risk of COVID or its complications. And this is pretty much substantiated by others in the immune field, such as rheumatologists and dermatologists. But we didn't know this in advance, and it really led us as groups to work together internationally to make certain that there were no negative impacts on our patients. And again, because the patients had not been enrolled in vaccine trials if they were immunosuppressed, to make certain that immunosuppression was not going to greatly impact on the outcome of vaccines.
That's a great point. So there's still that little thing called the pandemic, right? That is impacting our daily lives. And so is your assessment at this point that that's sort of stabilized to some extent in terms of the management of IBD patients?
I think it has stabilized, but it continues to evolve. We learned both in clinical practice and actually in clinical trials how to move more of the patients to virtual settings rather than in person, how to use more biomarkers in the management of the disease. But that's still in transition as we move from a pandemic to an endemic of this virus. And things are changing regarding compensation for virtual visits, et cetera. So I know this is not pharmacologic, but it really has been the major impact on our practice thus far.
Okay. I think I would be remiss if I didn't ask at least a little bit of a sense of where things may be going in terms of the proposed JAK label update and where things may land in terms of the future or 2022 in terms of what that label update will represent.
Well, this has been quite a challenge for gastroenterologists who are just starting to utilize tofacitinib as a JAK inhibitor for ulcerative colitis. And as we followed the real world experience after the clinical trials, we found that most of the data was actually substantiated from the clinical trials. The tofacitinib did work quickly in patients, even to the point that some systems practitioners, investigators were starting to use tofacitinib in an inpatient setting for more severe disease, with eventual transitioning to other longer term therapies. But just as that has been evolving, as you mentioned, there has been this restriction from the FDA that limits the use of tofacitinib to patients who had previously had an inadequate response or complications from TNF inhibitors. Now, as we recall, in the groups in the Octave studies the phase 3 trials of tofacitinib in ulcerative colitis, there were differences, as we anticipated, between the bio-naive and the bio-experienced patients. And indeed, the bio-experienced patients had a lower overall response rate than the bio-naive patients. So, as I've said, in my belief is that the FDA has limited the use to patients who are least likely to respond, which I think changes the risk-benefit ratio. Furthermore, as we've explored the data in ulcerative colitis patients from the clinical trials as well as real-world experience, we see that the IBD population is different from the older rheumatologic population that have risk factors. Our patients are young. Yes, indeed, they do have risks for thrombosis, and we've recognized that. But in the clinical trials, there was not an abnormal risk of thrombosis in the IBD populations. The 2 patients who actually had thromboembolic events had had a prior history of thrombosis or other risk factors. So I believe that the populations are different, and I'm disappointed that the FDA has limited the use to biologic exposed patients. Now, at the same time, and as you emphasize, most recently, we've had a second oral drug approved for the use of ulcerative colitis, which is ozanimod, again, for moderate to severe disease. Now, this gives another option of oral therapy, which at the moment is not restricted by FDA warnings against prior biologic or restricting to prior biologic use. Yet gastroenterologists have to become familiar with the sphingosine 1 receptor modulator mechanism of action and some of the details regarding initiating patients on this type of therapy.
Right. Yeah. So it's definitely an evolving time right now in terms of the management of IBD. In that vein, we've talked about 2021. We're in the fourth quarter of 2021. Is there anything in particular that you are looking forward to, or that may stand out in terms of the management of IBD patients as we look forward to 2022?
Absolutely. So one of the problems with IBD management now is that it has become quite complicated with the increasing array of therapies that are available, particularly in the moderate to severe category, where we have very few head-to-head trials between these newer therapies. And indeed, those trials are limited to what's known as the Varsity study that compared vedolizumab to adalimumab in moderate to severe ulcerative colitis, where there was a benefit of vedolizumab over adalimumab in the primary outcomes of clinical remission and endoscopic improvement. We've also had a head-to-head study recently presented and now in the process of publication in the setting of Crohn's disease, which evaluated adalimumab versus ustekinumab in moderate to severe Crohn's disease. And in this study, there was no superiority of either of the agents in the primary endpoint. So this demonstrated a lack of superiority, essentially comparability. But as we move into 2022 and 2023, as we anticipate additional biosimilars for adalimumab coming into the market, we're now going to have to look at the pharmacoeconomics in line with these different types of clinical trials, because the price point for adalimumab is likely to come way down with the biosimilars, and that's going to make the pharmacoeconomics somewhat different compared to the novel agents.
That's a great point. So, I mean, roughly a year from now, we'll be will be 2023 will be knocking on the doorstep in terms of, and with that will come the advance or the arrival of one or more of the versions of biosimilars of adalimumab. So that will definitely change the market.
And not only that, Eric, and not only that, we can anticipate 2 new agents or so coming into the marketplace for this moderate to severe category. As we are aware, AbbVie has already submitted an NDA for risankizumab in the setting of moderate to severe Crohn's disease. And I think in the relative future, we can anticipate application for upadacitinib, another JAK inhibitor for the setting of ulcerative colitis. So that's going to leave us with nearly 20 drugs, including the varied biosimilars in the setting of moderate to severe disease, without a great deal of distinction between them.
Okay. As you mentioned, there was an arrival of a new oral therapy for ulcerative colitis this year. Potentially upadacitinib is also an oral therapy with a chance for a potential approval next year. Has there been enough experience yet to get a sense of where the oral therapies will fit into the management of IBD yet, or is it too soon to tell in terms of where they may land?
Well, as I mentioned, tofacitinib has somewhat been abrogated by the FDA's new warnings. And frankly, Eric, ozanimod is a little bit too new in gastroenterologists to really make a overall statement. In my own experience, since I've had the opportunity of using ozanimod in both clinical trials and now in my clinical practice, there are a lot of details that are being described for ozanimod and getting patients started and ongoing. But I think for the most part, they're pretty minimal in their overall restrictions. And again, we've got to get used to doing a baseline cardiogram for patients and identify a few patients who are going to be at risk for specific complications such as macular edema. But once we get accustomed to this, I think it'll flow smoothly. And I really believe there's a role for oral therapies, including the S1P modulators and JAK inhibitors in the setting of moderate to severe ulcerative colitis in the outpatient setting.
Okay, thank you for that. So we've talked a little bit about 2021. We've looked forward to 2022. The last thing I wanted to touch upon is the 20th anniversary, the 20th event of AIBD. And you as a chairperson at AIBD, I was wondering if you could share what we can look forward to that event coming up December 9th to the 11th in Orlando, Florida.
Well, a lot has changed in the past 20 years in the management of IBD. And I think we're going to also take a historical perspective on the management through time to see where we've been, where we're at, and as we're going, as you say, with the introduction of a number of newer therapies for the management, and all of these additional considerations on the complexity of patients with IBD. We had a fellows meeting just prior to the ACG, and one of the younger fellows mentioned in a question and answer setting that IBD is like an ocean. It's very deep, and there are a lot of stuff in there, and he's trying to learn how to swim in this ocean. And I think all of us are really trying to assimilate the information and the new therapies as they come in and try to optimize each one. And then the future is going to be like our friends in rheumatology. It's going to be combination therapies. And lowering the price of some of the biologics and agents as they become biosimilar is going to afford that opportunity. As therapies are going to become more cost effective, it may be possible to use drugs in combination once we identify how safe and effective they are.
Yeah, that's a great analogy, actually. And adding to that ocean, again, managing patients during the endemic in terms of COVID-19, it's a lot of issues to deal with. So Dr. Hanauer, we thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate the chance to speak to you, and we look forward to catching up with you again very soon.
Thank you, Eric. It's a pleasure.